Welcome to today's webinar. Today's topic is expertise, authority, and trust, or as we like to call it, E.A.T for short. So we'll be hearing valuable insights from our partner, Tidal Health Group, about what it is and why it's important. So for today's agenda, what we're going to do, we are going to run through some introductions, authority, what we are solving, who is Kevin Bacon, all this good stuff. And for the record, the webinar will be recorded. So you guys will, anybody who misses this will of course have access to this, and it'll be sent out to them via email. So without any further ado, let me go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Mike Hamburg. I'm a senior client success manager in Press Ganey's consumerism division. I help my clients achieve success with optimizing their online presence through reputation management and provide them data-driven insights and customized recommendations on how to best attract more patients and stand out from their competition. And also, I did want to add before Bryan introduces himself, any questions that anybody has, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And Bryan and I will have a short Q&A at the end of the webinar. So Bryan, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'm Bryan Cush, co-founder of Tidal Health Group. We're a New York-based healthcare marketing and analytics firm. We specialize just in healthcare. We're a full-service digital agency, and we really pride ourselves in supporting our clients in that we can support any digital touch point with a potential healthcare consumer. We've been a long-standing partner with formerly Doctor.com, now Press Ganey.
Awesome. We're really excited to have Bryan on board for these webinars that we do. So we're going to get right into it. And today, like I said, we're going to be discussing how to build your language of authority, both from the clinical and the consumer perspective. As we journey through this topic, it's important to note that the growth path to authority is cyclical. The greater your level of authority, the more consumers you attract. The more consumers you attract, the more important your level of authority becomes. To quote one of my personal favorite movies, Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. So what does that mean? The better you dress up your online reputation, the more attractive you're going to look to potential patients.
As we dig into a little bit more of the marketing specific topic that Mike introduced us, E.A.T, which is also known as expertise, authority, and trust, we want to understand what that is and where it came from. On a high level, it's a subjective concept or indication to search rankings. So Google produces a document that's about 170 pages long at this point called the Google Quality Raters Guideline. It's a guide that they give to their quality raters, who are a physical staff of 10,000 plus people that actually audit search results and ultimately try and match if the search result is of quality for that search that was made. Basically, are they matching the intent of that user? Inside that document, though, they've made it really clear if your website talks about anything health or finance related, we're holding you to a higher standard. So that's where the concept of E.A.T comes in, is that there's ranking factors around proving the authorship behind your healthcare information online. And a few lines pulled right from that guideline, you haven't been able to sit down and read all 170 pages, are simply put, is that content produced in a professional style? It's edited, reviewed, and updated on a regular basis from a medical expert. That's it in a simple sense of the concept we're going to walk through of how we think of that in a broader sense and how we've applied it and how you also can measure that.
Awesome. So I want everyone to pay close attention to this section. I'm going to give you the formula for authority. Today, the consumer experience begins well before the patient walks into the door of your clinic, right? And so it's important for today's physicians to be excellent at both the patient and the consumer experience. And so how does that look in the business world of healthcare? Well, it plays a much bigger role than many of us could imagine. As a patient, how do I go from someone who's looking up a generic symptom to one who's actually finding a healthcare provider who can help me? That part of the patient consumer journey should be a huge focus of healthcare. How to find patients who need your help and bring them into your system is an age-old problem. And we're going to talk a bit more about that throughout this webinar. Once someone comes through your door, they come into the world of patient experience, where you continue to build that level of clinical or physical authority.
Now that we've seen the high level view of the formula, let's slice into one piece of it. So when we think about the clinical side of authority, we think about the language that the business of healthcare thinks of, the people inside healthcare, the doctors, the researchers, the practitioners within healthcare itself. A lot of the language they're using, you see here, is spread across things like publications, affiliations, grants. Some of it's even around titles, productivity. So the idea here is that there's a language set that the business of healthcare talks about, but there's also a language set that the consumers of healthcare talk about, and we're starkly trying to show the difference here between them. Sorry, that.
No problem. Thanks, Bryan. So here, the formula for authority consumer language. To position your organization with customers, you have to understand their decision-making process. What goes into a patient deciding what provider or practice they're going to go to? Even as they've amassed clinical expertise and streamlined their services, so many organizations struggle with the positioning. Their customers' care journeys, the string of choices made between the emergence of health need and when they make their first appointment are still opaque to them. Illuminating these care journeys demands a shift in perspective. Organizations must be able to adopt the consumer point of view as they weigh their options in the marketplace. To do that, they should consider data and market intelligence that falls outside of the traditional purview of patient satisfaction. So let's talk about the patient's perception of the consumer journey. From our patient trend survey conducted in 2020, 88% of patients will go online to read about reviews regarding a provider they've been referred to. And half would decide not to book with that provider if he or she had incomplete listings information on the web. When it comes to booking the appointment, the majority, 60%, prefer the convenience of digital scheduling over phone calls. And the number one reason a patient would return to the same provider is quality customer service. Can't stress that enough. But even with all of these digital resources, more than half of consumers say the patient journey is difficult. Respondents cite being time consuming and not seeing enough information about a provider online as 52% as the leading frustrations in finding the right provider. Customer service, again, remains the number one factor that keeps patients coming back, consistent with 2018 results. Great communication and ease of appointment booking are key factors for earning a 5-star review.
Thanks, Mike. And as you set the tone from the consumer's perspective, we then start to think from the clinical perspective. So we like to be playful with this, and we think about it from the 6 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon. That Google has come out and they've stated on their own website that when they source healthcare information in a search result, they state the sources that they pull that from. Those sources are really common, and I think most of what people think of as an authority within healthcare, things like the CDC, the FDA, World Health Organization, Mayo Clinic. And then traditionally in a physical consumer's world, you had layers of separation to be an authority. So you would then move from those institutions to then the next larger institution like a hospital, a department, a provider group, down to the individual practitioner the furthest away. But what the internet has done is it really broken that model, and it allowed any layers to become an authority. Really interestingly, in a recent interview with their head of search, they even went so far to say that it didn't matter the difference of physical authority in who the author was on medical content. Simply put, they said, if you just got Fauci to come and review all your medical content, just because he's such an authoritative voice doesn't mean that all your content is now an authority. The idea is that no one entity can meet every user's intent. So what that does is it breaks in those layers and allows even the individual practitioner to be seen as an authority when you're meeting the consumer's intent. Now that we kind of understand the layer of authority, we get this question all the time is really, what's the opportunity? I'm not Mayo Clinic. How can I compete against them? And the way we respond to that is that there's billions and to this point, maybe trillions of searches online that are health related. It's actually the largest category of search online is health related search. What this visual represents is a classification of those searches that traditionally many people, when they think about healthcare searches, or when they're thinking about how to promote themselves, they fall within the common treatments and branded categories. They think about it as the name of the practice, the name of the practitioners, the name of the procedure that they're doing, but ultimately they're really missing out on the larger playground. That almost 80% of searches fall into symptoms, departments, specialties, conditions. It's the layman thing that people are suffering from, ultimately looking for their care. And simply put, way more people know what you do than who you are. As we then walk through understanding, we've now set the tone on how large the opportunity is. This is a good visual that represents how that journey online is also complex, though, where the opportunity is there, but there's also opportunity for breakpoints. So how we work in partnership with Press Ganey is to manage those touch points across the full spectrum of search. So what we've mapped is, on average, people can take up to 2 weeks and have 15 different digital interactions with you before doing some physical outreach. Each one of those interactions is a potential breakpoint or a loss before you even have a chance to speak with that consumer.
So now that we've discussed the consumer path to healthcare, let's talk about the blockers to care, or as we refer to it, patient leakage. So that term is probably new to a lot of you listening to this, but today's healthcare systems face challenges on all fronts. Just as mounting costs have made volumes more important than ever, consumers' appetite for convenience has made them much more selective about their choice in providers. A once-in-a-generation demographic shift has upended the accepted models of customer engagement. Consumers' expectations are rising at a pace that nearly overtakes providers' ability to satisfy them. Daunting as these challenges can seem, they also represent opportunities, and forward-thinking organizations can learn how to seize them. Early adopters of a consumer-driven model of care will be well rewarded by their differentiated position in the marketplace. Highlighted data from our patient trend survey, the number one reason that would prevent a patient from booking an appointment is difficulty contacting the office. This is perhaps why patients prefer to use digital methods to schedule appointments. No hold times, busy signals, or out of office voicemails. And as a millennial, guys, everyone listening, I can attest to that. I want convenience, and I really just want to get it over with and not have to be put on hold, because I know whenever I call a doctor's office, the first thing that I experience is being put on hold. The biggest factor the second biggest factor is actually discouraging patients. Low quality reviews. In fact, more patients, 59%, care more about the credibility and authenticity of the review than the star rating itself, with 41% citing negative reviews as a reason for not booking an appointment. 49% of patients also see incomplete listings as a red flag, as it should, affirming the need to keep your third-party listing sites robust with your conditions treated and procedures performed with up-to-date information about your practice.
Yeah, it's really funny about the difficulty contacting office, as well as that made me think of a data point that we're always representing, that the highest percentage of appointments are made on Mondays and Tuesdays between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. People come out of the weekend and now start thinking about their healthcare. They're often at their desk at work, and they may not be able to pick up the phone. They want to be able to chat. They want to be able to do it passively while they're still doing something else.
So true.
As Mike has zoomed in on the importance of reputation, I'm going to zoom out on how that data works in context of all the other data associated to your brand or your practice. This is a great visual that represents our partnership with them, that when we think about the data of your reputation and the data on your partner directories like the HealthGrades, WebMDs of the world, we extend that then to further data points and extend that to your website. So not only is all that data important, that it's uniform across online, but its relationship to the other data in your practice is just as important. So making sure things like, where does that provider work? What is their specialty? What are case studies that are related to that provider? What are the testimonials related to that provider? And ultimately, how does that all intermingle together is just another potential breakpoint if that data isn't correct and uniform across the internet and your website at large. As we shift gears back into then really hammering down the importance of reputation, we often get this question on, well, how do I rank around localized search? And that's the area that we see as the biggest opportunity when we get asked that question. Well, I'm not the Mayo Clinic. Well, we say the Mayo Clinic can't be everywhere. It's not physically located all across the country. So when users are using a high intent for localized care, that's your highest opportunity to represent that you're the authority in that area. And if you look at the graph on the right, this is pulled from a consumer trend study with Doctor.com, that over 50% of users are putting in a modifier around the specialty that they're looking for. So things like near me and local, top, best, specialist. What happens when they search that is that Google's smart enough to know that they're looking for physical care. They're looking for a physical business. So your Google My Business profile will actually serve as a result. And then that user can interact with that profile before even interacting with your website. Some data to back that up on the left-hand side is that we analyzed over 100,000 appointments and ultimately drew it back to the digital source that they were driven from. Of that, 10% of them came specifically just from the Google My Business listing. So this was patients interacting with that entity and its reputation alone and not any experience of your website. Another great question we always get underneath that is, how do we market our brand and how do we market our providers? And the answer is always both. And this data shows that there's a higher volume of patients coming through brand listings, but there's also a large number coming through from the provider listings as well. To dig into some of the best practices around Google My Business, we give an example of a client on the right that works with both ourselves and Doctor.com. There's really three main rules of thumb, and this is across the board with reputation in general, but certainly with Google, as the popularity of Google My Business really just keeps growing. And those three rules of thumb are quantity, quality, and recency. I think the first two everyone understands. Quantity and quality is get great reviews and get as many as you can. But the third people often forget is recency. It's seen as almost a problem that can be solved once and be left alone. It's very common that there's this upswell of efforts, great reviews are gathered, and then they're left alone for months, if not years. Not only is that a poor signal to the user, it's also a poor signal to the search algorithm as well. And one of the biggest questions we always get, especially around multi-location or multi-doctor practices, is how do we handle that? You want to create separate listings, but you also want to make sure that those listings are pointing to the right place as well. Where we commonly see that all those listings are just centralized back to the homepage, that provides a poor user experience because then that person's navigating to find ultimately that practitioner or the individual location that they're looking for. So it's always a great opportunity to make sure that you have freestanding pages for each provider and each location, and that your reputation listings are pointing to them as well.
I'm glad you brought that up, the rule of thumb around quality, consistency, and recency, Bryan, as that is a theme I drive home with my clients often when thinking about review collection. 71% of patients said that the quality is the most important factor when reading patient reviews. So what makes a quality review? First, a quality review is found on a source that patients deem credible, aka a search result that's found on the first page of either Google or Bing. Trusted, recognizable sites like Google, Healthgrades, WebMD. As Bryan referenced earlier in the webinar, patients have an average of 15 plus digital interactions over a 2-week span before physical outreach. These days, you may be hearing more and more that patients selected you or your clinic after doing their own research. Whatever patients search to find you, you want to be in control of as much of that online real estate as possible by building up positive reviews and responding to any negative reviews. Next, a quality review gives valid and reasonable feedback. A 5-star review that says good or great is fine, but it doesn't tell me much or what to expect as a prospective patient who may be coming to you for care. The more a patient can reference their specific experience with you, the better. Lastly, if you're looking to boost your organic SEO, focus on capturing reviews that contain keywords you'd like to show up in search. When patients are searching for specific conditions or procedures online, the providers and practices with the most matching keywords will be highlighted in search. And you can see here in the example where, for example, pain management, there's a 61 next to it. PRP, there's a 38. That means that patients are leaving feedback with these terms in their review, and Google is capturing that and putting it into this bank up at the top. So, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, as we now understand the importance of reputation, best practices, how to gather reviews, we're going to dig even deeper down. To Mike's point, is the language of the review. And what these two visual comparisons here represent is we did a review of one particular disease state or condition of septal perforation. One of the word clouds represents the clinical language around this. One of the word clouds represents the consumer language around this. And I think it's really easy to guess which one is which. When you look at the word cloud on the right, this was pulled from CPT and ICD coding language. And there's only 16 different variations of the condition itself, or ultimately an indication towards it. So there's a very structured language around how the business clinical side of healthcare looks at this. But when you look at the word cloud on the left, not only is the language starkly different, the variations are starkly different in quantity. We mapped 1,400 different unique queries that ultimately led to this condition page, and then ultimately look for more care. So this is meant to be really, really clear and stark that the consumer language is much more varied and much more layman. So you have to very much flip the script on how you think about what language you ultimately want in your processes, how you're talking about these to your patients, and ultimately will come full circle about how they think about and write those reviews that are ultimately seen by then a future prospective patient as well. As we dig through all this, understanding reputation, authority, physical authority, digital authority, we get that a lot of times just go, well, where does this even live? What does this look like? How do we even begin to tackle this? And the way we look at it is that all our clients are really a media brand. You're producing information that you're ultimately reaching out to potential consumers, and you need to set the bar and the standard that it's come from an authoritative voice, that authoritative voice has the credentials behind to be the authority, and that you have proven that you have had consumers, i.e. patients, come through and review you as being the authority on your service as well. So when we think about that, these are some visual examples that we can provide: authorship, last published dates, last reviews. What are the physical efforts that provider is doing, like publications, research, and grants? How do we bring that physical world front to the digital world and represent that authority in partnership with the reputation that you're continually building as well? When we then think about how do you measure this? You do all these efforts, you do this groundswell of reputation, you're digging into your physical consumer efforts. How do we think about whether this is success or not? For us, the simplest way we look at is organic traffic, that we're all constantly trying to decode the algorithms between Google and Bing. And ultimately, if they're feeding you more organic search around healthcare, they're seeing you as an authority around this ranging of topics. So when we look at this kind of client as a case study throughout, as we've continued to implement processes around building reputation, processes about highlighting credentials, processes around highlighting authorship, it's continued to grow organically and pull in more and more variations of all that consumer search. And past that, then we just continue to increase the care and the appointments that are seen and patients that come in. The way we see that is just really a limitless opportunity to meet the user's intent. There's billions of searches online each year, and there's no way that those 8 or 10 entities that are seen kind of as the Kevin Bacon are ever going to answer those, because they physically are not located everywhere. So when we begin to think about some takeaways from this, on a high level, we often look with our clients and go, don't think of information within a silo or department within you. commonly things like publications and research and all these internal efforts around associations and outreach within the clinical side, the physical side, were really held insular inside the operation. And that marketing communications was a one-way flow of information. That language was promised or an experience was promised here, and then that was pushed and never got feedback back. So the way we really try to think of it is that it needs to be a cyclical process. That marketing should be understanding what operations and the physical side of your authority is doing, but authority and the physical side of what you're doing needs to then communicate back to marketing how to adjust, and it becomes a constant cyclical process.
Exactly. And just to kind of conclude and some takeaways before we kind of end today's session, your reputation is what helps differentiate you from your competitors online. Every provider that has an MPI number has a presence on one of these websites. What we do is we help you stand out amongst those, that basic general presence. We give you guys a voice to control these different profiles, which most doctors don't have, and it's a really beneficial tool to stand out again amongst your competitors in this big sea of sameness where everybody kind of is on this level playing field. So yeah, I mean, that's really, I mean, I think Bryan and I did a solid job really explaining the importance of E.A.T and really gaining that authority over your online reputation. But I just want to also thank Bryan for joining us today and Entitled Health Group. It's always a pleasure collaborating with you. And I also wanted to open it up to any of our joiners listening. Any questions that you guys have, please feel free to write it in the chat. Raise your hand. We can let you speak if you'd like. Please don't be shy. This is supposed to be collaborative for all of us.
No, thank you, Mike. I always appreciate the opportunity. It's been great to work with you and your team as well, and show the kind of symbiotic relationship of giving our clients really full control of their online presence and their online efforts.